John 17:17 says God's word is truth. Not the truth, it is truth. So truth is whatever God says. In Genesis chapter 2, and we looked at these verses last week, in Genesis chapter 2 is the story of the very first marriage. But it worked differently than any other marriage. Because what we saw last week is God took a man that he had created, Adam or Adam, and he made that Adam, that man, in his image. And in that man were all the qualities that we consider masculine or male quality. You know, focused, rational, strong, determined, all the what we consider, macho male testosterone qualities. But also in that man, and this is where we have to adjust our minds a little bit, were all of what we would consider female qualities. Intuitiveness, sensitivity, emotion, nurturing, caring, all those qualities. Well, how could that? And it has to be because if God made man in his image, where would those qualities have come from if they hadn't come out of God?
That's right.
Where would those qualities come from if all God put in that man were what we consider masculine qualities? Not only that, even some of God's name communicate that. We mentioned this last week. One of God's names, which just sounds, is El Shaddai. But that word in Hebrew means the many-breasted one. It's a nurturing, caring God. And so all of those qualities were in this first man. And God's the one that said to him, it's not good for him to be alone. It's not good for all those qualities to be in him. Because I believe personally that Adam was fat, dumb, and happy. That was fat or not. That's the expression. I mean, he was content. He didn't have to get along with anybody. We talked about that last week. And God said, that's not good. So God caused the deep sleep to fall upon him, and he took out a rib. Now, people misunderstood that. That word rib in Hebrew means side. In other words, he took half of him out. And he formed a new being with that half of him, which is what we would consider the female side. And God formed a new being, and now what you have at the end of this process is you have everything that was originally in him, half of it's now in another person with another will and another set of eyes. Another will. And he looks at her and he says, I recognize you. Because I recognize you're bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. I recognize that's my flesh. I recognize that's my bone in you. In other words, although we're now two separate people, I recognize we're really one because you came out of me.
Okay, come on.
Because then Genesis goes on and says that, therefore, because of that process, what's going to happen is a man shall leave his father and mother. Oh, there'd be a good message. A man shall leave his mother and not find another one. I heard some women there. No, don't look around. A man shall leave his father and mother, and the word in Hebrew means cling to or cleave or be joined to his wife. What happens is this. In the first marriage, God took all those qualities that were in one person and now separated them into two different people, but they're still one being, but they now have two wills, two sets of eyes, two sets of ears, and two set ways of looking at things and experiencing things. Every other marriage takes two individuals. She came from a small family in Ohio. We talked about it last week. With two girls, everything was prim and proper. I came from a wild family of 5 boys in eastern Pennsylvania where dinner time was chaos. So we have two different backgrounds, two different ways of looking. And I talked to you about it last week, I discovered it took 10 years for God to get this through me. She doesn't think like I do. And after complaining to God and praying and interceding and fasting and all kinds of things, he got through to me. And she won't because he made her to think differently. Amen. That shocked me. Why would you do that? Because I think so clearly and so rationally. And now I realize I had to make some, here's that word, adjustments. I now had to take these differences, and instead of seeing these differences as separating us, begin to see these differences as providing a greater way of looking at things. We mentioned this last week. The genius of God's design for your body is you have two eyes. And understand these two eyes don't see everything the same way. They see things from a slightly different angle. We've talked about this before. You have two ears. They hear things from a slightly different angle. But what your brain does with those two impulses is it takes those two different points of view and blends them together and gets depth of field. Those ears take those two different angles of hearing the same orchestra and blends them together and gives you stereophonic sound in your head. And her way of dealing with things, her intuitive, emotional sensitivity side of things, opens things up to me I never would see by my rational, logical, determined, straight-head, focused, full speed ahead approach that I have. On the other hand, her emotional sensitivity, all of that would not get us through difficult times when you need to be able to go regardless of what you feel and just focus and go forward ahead. In other words, we need each other. But the key to that is understanding we're one. We're not in competition. That means whatever happens to her happens to me. Whatever happens to me happens to her. Whatever happens to us. So if there are issues that we have to deal with, there are issues. It's not she's got a problem, Pastor, go straighten her out. Or he's messed up, Pastor, would you straighten him out? No. The two of you are messed up. The two of you have a problem because you're one being. And the reason the scriptures in Ephesians 5 trouble people is because they don't understand the very message that Paul is getting across there, is that husband and wife are one. And all he's describing are two different functions. Now here's where I want to go to now. And here's why I think this is so important. And here's the message I really want to draw out of this. You can be married, we'll be married 43 years this July. You can be married, in fact, we were married maybe 20 years before this began to dawn on me that we were one. That means we lived together as husband and wife, raising 4 kids, although, let's see, 20, yeah. We're raising 4 children, considering we had a successful marriage, and we did. I mean, we weren't, all along having no concept we're one. People can live together as husband and wife under one roof for 50 years and more and just live as 2 individuals who happen to live in the same house, sleep in the same bed, produce the same children, own the same home, go on the same vacations, walk through their entire married life together and do it as 2 individuals who just happen to get along pretty well. And that's where the church is. So you can be joined to somebody and not know it. You can be one with somebody in a wonderful gift that God gives to you. And marriage is a gift from God. It is an institution that no man would think of. Adam didn't think of it. But God ordained it. Because out of that comes all kinds of opportunities to grow. Out of that comes all kinds of strength when you take 2 different people, make them one, and now they have to flow together as one, not in spite of those differences, but using those differences. But just because that's what opportunities God's given you doesn't mean you've recognized and are walking in it. So the beginning really of restoring a marriage, the beginning of marital counseling is getting to recognize who they are. The whole basis of the marriage ceremony that I do is it's literally entering into a covenant. And I want couples going into marriage to understand that they're not entering a partnership. They're entering a covenant. And by the nature of a covenant, you become one.